p.m., March 2nd, 2020. I would like to call to order the special board meeting tonight, a safety workshop. We want to thank everyone in attendance tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your busy evening to be with us tonight. Hopefully, we gain a lot of valuable information that'll help us perhaps here in the near future make some decisions about our safety program at the Othello School District. Tonight's meeting will entail a safety presentation from the administration, along with a presentation from Othello Police Department. So having said that and trying to redeem our time the best we can, I will turn it over to our superintendent to do the presentation on behalf of the district.
Thank you very much, sir. First, I would like to say to the board, we have some guests in here. I just want to introduce Dr. McBride here is from Clear Risk. He is one that handed out the card. We also have Patty Ferguson here that's with Clear Risk as well. And we also have two of our own staff, Amy Paris and Greg Fultz, that's going to be participating in the presentation. And of course, Chief of Police is here with his officers as well. I'm going to open up just with a historical context. I'm going to give you a very high-level view, and mainly for the board members that was not here last year, possibly did not participate in the safety forum. So we're going to open up this presentation, and really is that safety forum. Yes, and just we're just going to go through that very quickly. Just go to the next slide. Back in March last year, we assembled an MMS auditorium, and we shared a number of different things that was surrounding the safety of our schools in Othello. Go to the next one. We started off talking about keeping our kids safe to and from school, some of the things that we were doing. The next one. We then went to looking at safety on the school grounds and playgrounds, and we shared the great things, some of the things that are happening in that area. Next slide. We then moved to the building and interior and exterior and shared some things that was happening in that area. Next. And then we went to a portion we called student staff physical safety, and we shared what's happening in that area for students and staff for their physical safety, things that we're doing. Next slide. Then we went to prevention and resources, and you're going to hear more about that great work that's continuing on that'll be shared by our staff. Next slide. You'll hear a little bit more tonight, but we did share this last year as well, some of the things that is happening with our students and staff and surrounding mental health. Next slide. And then we also shared last year in that forum about our threat assessment team, and it was, I think, newly assembled at that time, and then our team will be able to share more specifics about what's happening and just kind of catch you up to date with where we are right now. We also had Rigo present last year and talked about technological safety and things that we were doing in that arena. Next slide. And then Chief of Police came up and shared some things as well. You'll hear from him extensively tonight. Next. And then we had also our Adams County Sheriff that came up, participated, and shared some things that he's involved with the school district. And then we talked about protection measures, things that we were doing as a district. Next slide. And then we had invited Mr. John Cerner, the superintendent of Toppenish, and he shared his thoughts on what's happening in his district. And it was just an invitation, and he just shared. There was nothing attached to us that we was going to be doing what he was doing. He was just there to share. And then we also shared additional options that are being considered, and you hear about some of that stuff this evening. And then go back, and there's another presentation. Go to the next slide. So at the very end of that presentation, the safety forum, we shared with the community that we're going to give a survey to our parents, to our students, to our staff, community members, and we also gave that survey to the safety forum. those members that were there. So we probably had in excess of 600 to 700 individuals that took the survey combined. So when you look at this, one of the questions that was asked was, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the safest, would you feel safer or less safe if teachers or school employees had non-lethal protection such as pepper spray? So just very clearly you can see that in the safety forum there, a great number of the participants felt that pepper spray was a really good option, that they would feel safer there. With the students, it was about tied there. Go to the next question. You can see there was also a question about, on a scale from 1 to 5, 5 being the safest, would you feel safer or less safe if teachers or school employees were armed with guns in your school if they were licensed to carry a firearm? So you can see right around 50% at the safety forum, 51%. Parents and community members didn't rate that high as it being a safest or safe option. The same thing with staff. Students was also about the same as the safety forum, right about 51% felt that that was a safe option. Go to the next slide. This one is pretty telling as well. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the safest, would you feel safe or less safe if a security or SRO were armed with guns in your school if they were licensed to carry a firearm? So this is specific to SRO. And so you can see across the board, it was just high ratings for what they felt. So from the safety forum to parents and community, staff and students, they all felt that that was a good, safe option.
Just to confirm, our SRO does carry firearms
Yes.
on campus, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, just wanted to verify.
Yes.
Thanks.
That was just the way the question was phrased. So I just wanted to share that with you. As Chief of Police goes through his presentation, Chief is going to make a recommendation. You'll actually hear that recommendation coming from him to the school district. So at this point, I just wanted to catch the board up to date where we were and the results of that survey, and then we'll turn it over to you, Chief.
Thank you for being here tonight, Chief. So I for one, I'm excited to hear. I know I want to thank you for taking the time that you've invested in this. I know you've been part of a committee with our district here, and again, want to thank your guys that you have here. I mean, this tells us that you guys are on the same page as the district. You care about what's going on, and school safety is a priority for you guys. So thanks for being here tonight.
You're welcome. Okay, so we can actually hit the presentation mode?
You're going to need to talk right into the, I know that you have a very commanding voice, but for YouTube to be able to hear is my concern.
Just hit F5. Function key F5 will start it. If it's in PowerPoint. Did you convert it to slides? There we go. Okay, so I want to say thank you for inviting us. We did put quite a bit of research into this, quite a bit of time into it. I did assign specific parts of this to my staff. I've been in law enforcement, this will be 31 years, supervising school resource officers, working very closely with our schools has always been a priority for me. Today I brought Sergeant Aaron Garza over my shoulder here. He is our firearms instructor, and he's very well versed on this and knows the laws around that. Seth Carlson is our school resource officer, and you're going on 3 years as an SRO. And then Sergeant Brent McFarland. And Sergeant McFarland was brought because we actually want to talk about a concept later on that actually fits with some of our vulnerability assessments around crime prevention through environmental design. And I'll explain why we're actually going that direction as we start talking through some of these. Now, as we look at this, we can't design the same response to every threat. So, next slide, please. What's the threat? Active shooters, what we see in the news all the time. 99.9% of the problems that we deal with in a school are not active shooters, thank God. But within active shooter, we're also talking someone with a knife that would want to harm someone, or other ways of seriously hurting a lot of people. Now, if you think about it, who are our active shooters? That has a lot to do with how we prevent it or how we respond to it. Generally, active shooters are students. We know that. So Officer Carlson and I have been teaching the Run, Hide, Fight classes here in town. We study every active shooter scenario that we can find because we want to know what's the problem, how do we respond to it. And that, we don't want to make recommendations to you that are absolutely irrelevant, and you'll hear some of those and the whys of why we're not even considering those as we get into it. The next would be an employee. Think disgruntled, somebody that's unhappy, maybe it's an estranged spouse. Those could be some of your next threats. Very rarely is the school shooter a stranger. So things like ID card systems, is that really going to prevent a stranger from coming into the school and shooting people? So we're going to talk about some of those as we go through it. And then if you think about what's more common, you have fights. You have fights fairly routinely, probably in highest priority junior high, probably then the high school, and then some of the elementary schools. Now, in those fights, generally it's students. Could it be a student stranger? Yes, it could. Is it gang related, or is it just because they're not best friends anymore? They're fighting over a girlfriend or something like that. Depending on what the scenario is it changes what the response is. But if you think about it, if that's an unarmed fight, you're going to hear later on why we don't want to introduce a gun to it. So next slide. Some of the additional threats. We see a lot of drugs. Now, I'm not going to say a crazy amount of drugs, more than I want to see in our schools. We see bullying, cybercrime right now, and cyber stalking, cyber bullying, you name it, child pornography. These have been topics over the last few years that we talk about a lot. So those are items that I think, as we look at our threat to our kids. Sexual assault, can it happen in our schools? Yes, it can. And then as we look at some of these responses, there may be other threats. As Greg Foltz and I are doing vulnerability assessments, a pack of dogs walks across the front of the high school's field. Well, if those were mean dogs, that's a threat. Is there a way to prevent something like that? Last year, we had a mentally ill individual come on campus and start harassing some of our young ladies. Well, what could we have done about that? And then, if you think about it, some of these solutions can actually help as we get into bigger problems like pandemics or other kinds of disasters that seriously could affect us. Next slide. So, strategies and tools. I want to commend the school district. First, this district has a safety director now. That was not in place when I started here. I think that's a great step to figure out where can we go? Now, I tease him every once in a while because I really don't care if a school teacher has a Scentsy candle in her room. But I would say he's on base, quite often, Greg. But as we keep going, school resource officer, one of the first things we did was reestablish the school resource officer position when I came to town 5 years ago. But I'd say one of the biggest resources we have is the school staff, the students and the parents. We don't want to leave out the parents because they're a huge part of this. Now, as we keep going, I've been part of the SEL stuff that we've been doing. I have actually sat in on a bunch of that. I've sat in on some of the actual threat assessments and participated. Those are resources that weren't happening. They're great resources. We're now doing vulnerability assessments, and we sent, 3 of us went to training. We're going into the schools. I will admit we're not getting them done near as fast as we want because it's an extensive process. Last, Greg and I were looking at the high school. I think we had several hundred slides and we're trying to pare it down to a point that it's actually reasonable, and that the schools can actually prioritize and work with it from there. We did complete McFarland, and as we get into this, we'll explain what some of those are, but they're an outside-in, looks at everything from fencing all the way down to the policies and procedures and if students are happy. So those are actually pretty darn important. And then I've actually listed crime prevention through environmental design, and then in this case, on this slide, run, hide, fight. And we're going to talk a bit about what run, hide, fight is and where we recommend it goes from here. Next slide. Now, weapons. I mean, I think that's one of the hot topics tonight. We're going to jump right into that one after I get through some of this, and that's where Sergeant Garza will take over. But when we start talking about weapons, we're talking about firearms, baseball bats, fire extinguishers, chairs, pepper spray, wasp spray. It's hard to say that all together. But then I want to talk about some other kind of things: training, school culture, and fortification or lack of fortification. And we'll be pretty detailed when we get into that. Next slide. Now, as you can see, we've done a lot in this district already. This is not a complete list, but this is quite a bit of the things, or big items, that we've done over the last few years, or at least started. Next slide. Now, instead of just saying what my opinion is on these different topics, we actually wanted to show you some of what we're actually looking at. I asked my staff to actually do a SWOT analysis of each one of these. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. You've all probably heard that topic before. I don't know if the school district uses that. But the next thing is, does it actually mitigate the threat? Or is it just something that makes us feel good? One of the things, and I'll get into it, is years ago, our state became one of the states that decided to make it difficult to have a firearm on a school campus. Personally, I don't think that made a darn bit of good, and I've been a cop 31 years. The reason I say it hasn't done a darn bit of good is every time I've dealt with a bad guy on a campus with a gun, I had some other reason to arrest them with that gun. That law, I've never used that law against a single person. It was a political response, and I'll flat out call it what it is. It's a political response. It made people feel good. Did it make bad guys quit taking guns to school? No. Now, and you'll see I'll call bad guys as we go through this because I'm being very politically correct. Does it create additional concerns? So if we do a change, is it going to create some other kind of effect that's either good or bad? We wanted to look into that. Does it provide a good return on an investment? Yeah, we could design an entirely new high school. Are you going to spend the money on it if it improves safety? Probably not, because, I mean, we could build Fort Knox. Every kid gets his own classroom. And there's a code to get them in and out. Are they safer? You bet. Is it a good learning environment? Absolutely not. So we can't make those kind of recommendations. Is it reasonable? And finally, next slide. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we want to make sure we have a lot of tools that we're providing and options that we're providing so that and as we look at some of these, nothing is going to be the perfect fix. So there's a whole lot of considerations on each one of these. Next slide, and Sergeant Garza, can you come up, please?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sergeant Garza, and like Chief Shank said, I'm the firearms instructor with the Othello Police Department. I'm going to be talking to you today about firearms and where they fit within the schools. So the state of Washington does have laws on the books that talk about firearms, and it talks about how firearms are prohibited on school grounds, but it also lists certain exceptions. And there are a lot of exceptions, and a lot of them people don't really know about. So I'm going to go through a couple of them just to educate everybody. So among those exceptions are the military, And then there's police, people like us. And then there's also school security. Now, the RCW lists devices in which school security guards can have, but they need to have specialized training or training that's equivalent to that of a commissioned law enforcement officer. And that would include firearms, considering that they are serious. They would also need training that is equivalent to that of a law enforcement officer. So when we talk about equivalent, what does that mean? So for police officers, or every police officer, when they get hired, they go through an academy, a basic law enforcement academy, and that academy is roughly 19 weeks long. And the amount of firearms training within that academy is extensive. They go through many upon many hours of firearms training. Now, when we think about firearms, it's kind of like an umbrella with a lot of different branches and bottom. So in the academy, they teach firearms proficiency, and that there's a lot in that. There's weapons manipulation, there's learning the pieces, the parts, how it works. There's disassembly, assembly, learning the nomenclature, getting familiar with the pistol itself. And then we go through actually manipulating it through speed reloads, tactical reloads, different ways and different scenarios you might have to use each. It also covers malfunction clearances, because sometimes in a gun battle, the gun might not operate. So what is that officer going to do, or what is that shooter going to do? First, identifying the type of malfunction, and then secondly, doing the immediate action to get that malfunction cleared in order to continue doing whatever that officer or shooter was doing. Other things that are covered under the umbrella of firearms are using it in different scenarios, during building searches, during room clearings, during CQB training, which CQB stands for Close Quarters Battle. There's a difference between a gunfight out on the street and an active shooter enclosed in buildings, in the classrooms and such. So those are all different scenarios and different ways that a shooter might find themselves, and all this type of training is provided in the basic law enforcement academy. Other items such as low light, knowing how to use your flashlight, when not to use your flashlight, backlighting, and different concepts. Another thing is, when we talk about using your firearm, that's one thing, but something even more important almost is being able to retain it and being able to defend it. Because as police officers, every situation we go into, there's always going to be a weapon involved. And that's our weapon. And that's the way each police officer thinks on every call they go on. Every situation they go into, they're introducing a weapon that's going to be there, that's theirs. Every time we go to a neighbor dispute, in our minds, we think there's going to be a gun in the situation. That gun is mine. Or every time we go to a domestic violence or any type of call, always in the back of our head is there's going to be a gun in this situation. That gun is mine. So we have to be able to retain it, to defend it. And so officers do get an extensive amount of training in the academy to do that. Also, if we want to make things equal or equivalent, we get a lot of training in the use of force. Now, use of force is a hot topic these days, especially the word excessive force. And believe me, all officers know it, and none of us want to use it. But for you people that don't know what excessive force is, there's a certain amount of force an officer can use, that force that is reasonable and that's necessary to enforce whatever action or law enforcement purpose that officer is doing. For instance, if I were to give an example, if I go to the middle school and arrest a 15-year-old, and in the process of arresting that 15-year-old, they start to struggle away from me, maybe try and break my grasp on them, not assaulting me, just trying to get away. And if I were to punch that person in the face to get them under arrest, well, I've used an excessive amount of force in that situation. That force that I used wasn't warranted. It was excessive. So when firearms are involved, that's magnified, it's amplified, especially when we use it. So officers need to be well versed in the use of force, the continuum of force, what's reasonable, what's necessary, and all that training is just the basic training that they get within the academy. Also, we talk about legal and civil liability. If one of us makes a mistake, whether it's out of negligence, out of recklessness, we could be held liable civilly and also criminally. It happens, I don't want to say all the time, but quite frequently with car accidents, you know, cops driving too fast or whatever the case may be. If it could be shown that they are reckless, then they could be criminally charged. Same thing applies with their firearm. If we use it incorrectly, we pay the consequences. And lastly, all these trainings, just to finish up on this slide, all these trainings are continuously updated through legal updates, through the LED, which is a law enforcement digest. It never stops. So an officer's always receiving the most modern and current training. That way they make the right decisions. So when we go back to these security guards and them receiving the training that's equivalent to as a basic law enforcement officer, that's some of the things that we need to consider if we want to allow them to do so. So going on, some other exceptions are if someone's doing some type of presentation at a school, maybe doing a firearms safety class or whatnot, then firearms are allowed on school grounds. Also, if someone's going to be involved in a school-authorized competitive shooting, that also allows for firearms to be on the premises. Some other ones are people that hold CPLs when they're dropping off and picking up their child. And that might be a surprise to a lot of people, but that is completely legal. Now, a debate can be made to how far can they go inside the building. The RCW just says dropping off and picking up.
What is CPL?
Oh, I'm sorry, I'll clarify. Concealed pistol license.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, so that's placing an application for a concealed pistol license, having it warrant or given to you, and that authorizes you to carry a pistol concealed on your person. So
Is that the same thing as a concealed carry permit?
yes, it's just a different verbiage.
Okay.
So if I wasn't a police officer and I wanted to drop off any of my kids and I had a CPL, I can go on school property with my firearm concealed, and that's completely legal to pick up and to drop off. And the next we talk about non-students, 18 years of age or older, taking firearms onto school property, however, leaving them in their car, secured and out of sight, if they're there to conduct business at the school. That is also legal.
Would conduct business include an employee?
Yes.
Okay.
So continuing on, if we want to talk about, oh, go ahead,
I
Chief.
believe, though, that the school district could create.
Can you move the mic so that, I've had this specific question come to me before.
I believe the school district could create policy preventing it on school grounds, but the state of the law allows it. The district could make it more specific.
Okay. Thank you.
So when we talk about different options, we have 3 options on the board here. So option 1 would be to allow trained staff members to carry firearms. Option 2 would be to allow or assign appropriately trained security guards to carry firearms. And then thirdly, to assign an armed SRO. And I'm going to be covering some of the pros and some of the cons to each. So moving on to allowing trained staff to carry firearms, there are some pros. The pros are there's more good guys to stop the bad guys. A common phrase in law enforcement, I'm sure you guys might have heard or might not have heard, is the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. So having armed staff would potentially assist in doing that. Secondly, it allows good guys better equipped to stop the bad guys. So a staff member not having a gun as opposed to 2 having a gun, the 2 having the gun would make him more equipped to stop the bad guy. And then thirdly, they may stop the shooter quickly. I don't know what the average time is for an active shooter, but I can say it's rather quickly from beginning to end. So having somebody there quickly to respond and potentially neutralizing that threat as quickly as possible is a definite pro. The cons to arming staff members, there's no deterrent if it's concealed. So if a staff member is carrying a pistol and it is concealed, no one really knows about it. So what deterrent is it actually going to provide? Secondly, they would require substantial training, and that requirement would be at a large expense. I've already covered some of the training involved that police officers go through. So I would expect someone to carry a firearm in school would have training that is equivalent to that. It's a difficult screening process. When a police officer applies for a police department, for them to get hired, they go through an extensive background investigation, a polygraph examination, and a psychological test. Now, background investigation is obviously to look into the background. Polygraphs help determine if the person is honest and help reveal any more information they need follow-up. And psychological tests are meant to determine if the person is equipped mentally to handle those types of situations, because it's not for everybody. Many staff members, janitors, teachers, they don't sign up with the expectation of, I might have to kill a student today, okay? And that's just the truth. Many staff employees do not think that way. So the difficulties in screening is there, because it does take a particular person to be able to want to do that, or at least have the capability and willingness to do that when the time presents itself. There's also an increase in civil liability to the employees, district, and the trainers. If something were to happen, let's say the person were to misplace the weapon, or God forbid there was a negligent discharge or an accidental discharge and somebody was hurt, the civil liability for the school district would be huge.
Okay, let's pause there for a
Sure.
second. I think Clear Risk might want to weigh in at that point on this option. Is there increased civil risk or civil liability to the district?
There's a mic coming right behind you to answer that question.
Just right there. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Dr. Hurst, and first off, members of the board of directors, thank you for inviting us this evening. As mentioned earlier, I'm Rich McBride. I have with me tonight Patty Ferguson. Patty is not only my executive assistant, but has been with Clear Risk for almost 29 years now. Extensive background in underwriting, claims, as well as risk management. And so we're glad to have Patty with me tonight to keep me both honest and to help me fill in the blanks along the way. I will share with the board, prior to my current role as Director of Risk Management for Clear Risk Solutions, I was a local school district superintendent for 25 years here in the state of Washington, followed by 15 years as a ESD regional superintendent for the last 15 years. And so I'm glad to be able to be here tonight to help share some thoughts, not only from a standpoint of your insurer tonight, but also as someone who's been around school districts for nearly 40 years, and probably the most important perspective of it all as a parent and a grandparent. So school safety is certainly near and dear to myself as well as all of us tonight. Clear Risk Solutions is a third-party insurance provider. We provide insurance services to 200 of the 295 school districts in the state of Washington, both large and small, as well as a number of cities and counties, which include their police officers and their police force. So again, thank you, Dr. Hurst, the board, and Chief Schenk for including us tonight in this dialogue. In fact, I was sharing with the Chief just a few minutes ago that before the meeting, that from our perspective as your insurers, it is great to be invited to be part of this dialogue at this stage. As many times as Patty will attest, a lot of times we will get a phone call from the district saying, we've met with our community, we've decided this is what we want to do. Can we get insurance for that? And so we're delighted to be able to be here tonight to share some thoughts on this issue of arming staff. I would share with you that this is not the first time that we've had a chance to visit with school districts regarding this. Toppenish School District happens to be one of our insureds as well, so it gives us a very unique perspective, and we're glad to share a little bit of that with you tonight. You know, some important thoughts to consider. I think Chief Schenk and his staff have done an exceptional job. In fact, I would share that they could quite frankly write the book on how the pros and cons of this discussion typically go. I will share with you, I guess, globally that as your insurer, it's important that you know that the global reinsurance companies, i.e. those large companies worldwide that provide the global insurance for school districts, they neither support nor do they insure school district staff who are armed. And it's just important that you know that. Now, I will add this caveat to that when the Toppenish staff was here, the superintendent was here, I have shared the podium with him many, many times in this presentation. And they will tell you that they have been able to secure insurance for their staff to do that. And that part is true. But what I will also share with you is that as it currently stands right now, there are a relatively small number of insurers. Many of those are small companies in the United States. One particular company that we have interacted with many times provides this coverage, but I will share with you, also having been part of a number of and observed a number of lawsuits in this particular realm, that the insurance coverage, the limits are very small. And quite frankly, in the event of, as was mentioned earlier, of civil litigation, those limits are not going to be anywhere adequate enough to support and provide defense for the school district nor the employee. So I think that's really important to point out. It's not that you can't get insurance, but I will share with you that it is grossly inadequate by any measure. And again, I would share that if my colleague from Toppenish is here, and I have a lot of respect for him and his community. As has been noted, and we would add an exclamation point, we, as well as the global insurers, have concerns about providing adequate staff training. As both the chief and his sergeant have pointed out, we believe that it would be difficult at best to make sure that your staff, if you chose to arm them, would be able to be provided anywhere near the level and the quality of ongoing training that Chief Shank and his department provide for his officers. And we can say that unqualified at this point in time. Our reinsurers would also tell you that unlike, well, I would just tell you that our reinsurers basically exclude coverage for armed staff. The legal immunity and the liability for an individual staff member is significant. As the sergeant spoke just a moment ago, that in the event of an accidental shooting or a wrongful death suit, especially here in the state of Washington, as a commissioned officer, both the chief and his sergeant and his staff know that if they follow the law, they use the right protocols, they have qualified immunity from any civil litigation or liability. That's not true for a school district and their staff. In the event of a wrongful death suit, and again, we can speak from experience having had insured school districts going through this, that not only is the district named in the lawsuit, the staff member that was involved in the shooting is named in the lawsuit, both as an employee and individually as well. Okay, so they have individual liability involved in the case. Your district administrators, your school superintendent, your district, your building principals will all be named in the suit. We know that, again, from firsthand experience in this particular case. And so the decision to arm staff is a significant decision from a standpoint of liability. I think as a board of directors and as your district administration, I think we want to think long and hard about asking a staff member to expose themselves personally to the liability that would occur in the event of a wrongful death suit. We happen to live in a highly litigious state. We have no tort caps on liability in our state. We know from firsthand experience that we have seen initial claims involved in school shootings in the state of Washington where the initial claim was in the tens of millions of dollars. The tens of millions of dollars. And so it's important that we think about, do we really want to expose our staff not only to the issues that the sergeant and the chief have spoken to about just the concept of can I step into the hallway and engage an active shooter, but we also want to think about the issues certainly surrounding liability, because that exposure is significant by any imagination. So as the chief and sergeant have expressed, we as an insurer recommend and strongly support for our school districts that if they wish to add additional security to their school districts, that they do it through the use of a commissioned officer, that they do it in partnership with their local police department. It is by far and away our strongest recommendation to you. We're glad to answer any additional questions along the way. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sergeant.
Okay. So moving forward, it would increase criminal liability as well in case of a wrongful death or whatever the case may be. If there was any type of proof of negligence or a recklessness, criminal charges could be pressed and followed through. And then there is an increased chance of good guys getting shot by responding officers. So if a staff member is armed and does have a weapon, when first responders do arrive, considering that active shooter situations are quickly evolving, rapidly changing, there's a lot of information that's being passed around, disseminated. They're quick and fast, and decisions need to be made in split seconds. The potential for a staff member to be shot is there.
It's not just there, it's huge. Talking.
Sorry, Mike.
Mike.
Probably need two of these. Talking to the Toppenish police officers and Toppenish police chief, they believe very much if they get in an active shooter scenario in their schools, knowing who these people are that are carrying guns, they're still worried that they're going to accidentally shoot them. And in the scenarios where we've practiced this using airsoft guns, and we know that we have non-combatants, for example, we had a newspaper reporter that was there taking pictures. He got shot probably 50% of the time because he's pointing something black at us. And when you're worried about getting shot and you know kids are dying, you don't slow down, or you can't slow down, and you've got to take action. We have qualified immunity like they've pointed out, even though, I've been sued numerous times. The worst situation is when you're also being sued personally. I know my city has insurance. My personal insurance isn't enough to cover me for tens of millions of dollars. Now, think about the second piece of that, and that's where, and we're going to cover this in the next recommendation, or next consideration too. If you're also being criminally charged for manslaughter because because they felt you shouldn't have had a gun in the school in the first place, then, that double compounds this. So, I'll turn it back here. Oh, you got it? Okay. So when I interrupt, I'll have a mic now. And Ms.
Thank
Stevenson
you.
doesn't have to look at me like that.
And also, a con would be a staff member bringing a firearm to what is usually unarmed conflicts. Like Chief Shank has said before, 99.99% of situations that happen in school are not, a firearm is not needed at all. However, when that staff member has that firearm on them, every situation they're going into, they're armed. And is that really necessary, to someone who's just acting up, or someone maybe just, I don't know, of the things that happen in school that don't need a firearm? I'm sure there's hundreds of them. For that staff member to introduce a firearm to every situation, it just doesn't seem like it's needed. The second option is to assign appropriate trained security guards with firearms. And like the staff member option, the pros are similar. There's more good guys to stop bad guys. The good guys are better equipped. They may stop the shooter quickly. It does, however, reduce the number of staff members that would need additional training, and then some security guards may already have that mindset needed to inflict that lethal force. And that's something I want to touch up on again. That mindset to inflict lethal force isn't something that, it's not just a word that we say. It's something that's really important, and it's something that weighs on the mind of all police officers. And no one wants to do that or use that type of force, but all of us are capable and ready to do so. And like I mentioned earlier, our principals, teachers, janitors, whoever the case may be, do they have that mindset? That's going to be really, really tough to convince me that they do. But security guards might, depending on their history, their training, or whatever the case may be. They might have that. The cons, same as the staff. If it's concealed, what deterrent are they actually providing? They also would need substantial training, and they also would have difficult time with the screening process. Excuse me. There will still be an increased civil liability to employees in the district. There'll be an increase in criminal liability to the security guard that makes a mistake. The same thing applies. If they do something wrong, they will be held liable. They too will have an increased chance of getting shot by responding officers. And likewise, security would also bring a firearm to situations that wouldn't require an armed person there. So we'll move on from there. And then lastly, the third option is to assign an additional armed SRO. So the pros are many. They provide positive relationships to serve as a department. They'll be the same, more good guys to stop, and police officers will be well-trained and well-equipped. There'll be less civil liability to the district, no civil liability to district employees, no criminal risk to district employees, and the screening process would already be done. Staff would not have to bring a firearm to unarmed conflict, and it would provide an opportunity for that police officer to be a positive role model in whatever programs the school district would have him be, for example, the DARE program.
Quick question. I wasn't on the board the last time we did this safety thing, so can you explain to me the difference between an SRO and an armed security guard?
Sure.
I can.
Go for it.
So a school security guard, or however you call it, is an unarmed district employee.
Okay.
They have no arrest authority at all, and they're not covered with any of this, and also none of the same, or almost none of the same training. A police officer is actually commissioned and established by state law with a arrest authority and requirements that they go through the safety, or the training, the background investigations and that, and it's actually a city employee. In this case, the school district and the city have a contract where the district is paying up currently about 50% of the cost of a school resource officer.
Thank you.
So cons, they could be expensive. However, this may be offset with grant money and not as many opportunities to stop the bad guy. So considering that, the Othello Police Department does have a recommendation. Chief, do you want to give a recommendation?
You bet. Our recommendation is not to arm staff or security, but in fact to partner with the city to, as funds become available, to place another SRO within the school district. Currently, we have the one shared amongst all the schools, primarily working at the high school and middle school, officed most often at the middle school. We're not doing as much proactive work with that as we would like, and a lot of it comes down to how many calls we're handling. I'd like to see getting the DARE program going again. I'd like to see some of the positives, the fist bumping in the halls and that kind of stuff, where we're not just reactionary. I believe 2 SROs would actually help us with that. I could have one, and working with the district if that's you guys' direction, because we worked well with the district on deciding where they're placed. But I would say we station one at the high school, one at the middle school, but they also respond to the other schools. I think we get a lot of the best bang for the buck with that. Currently, we're applying for a Department of Justice hiring grant that would pay a lot of the city's share. It would not pay anywhere close to even half, though, if the district were willing to pay what the grant didn't, and we received the grant, then I think we would have the best case scenario. If we don't receive the grant, there is some action happening within the Trump administration and the Second Circuit Court of Appeals that could damage our chances to apply. And basically, the Second Circuit sided with the Trump administration on denying grants or cops hiring grants to states that have sanctuary laws. So we may apply for it and then find we're not eligible. We're still going through the steps to apply for it and ask for the money. But that is our recommendation on firearms. And then if there's no more questions there, and I'm sure they'll stick around to answer more questions as we get done, I'll address some of the other recommendations as we keep going. Okay, thank you, Sergeant Garza. So I'm going to keep going. Some of the other things that were brought up were baseball bats. I'll address that, as well as bug spray and pepper spray, and we'll address both of those. So the first is baseball bats. Are there some pros? You bet. They're inexpensive, readily available. I think we could probably get them at Walmart. Law enforcement traditionally trains batons, which is very similar to a baseball bat, so the training could be very similar. Bats could be placed in many classrooms, if not every classroom, and bats are capable, and I did put this as a pro, bats are capable of inflicting significant injury. If you've got somebody with a firearm, you want to inflict significant injury. So, because you want to stop them. So a baseball bat has the ability to do that. Next slide. Pros, or cons, I'm sorry. Where are we at? Cons. Significant training to be proficient. Again, the same kind of concept with the firearm. We don't want you to bring a weapon that's going to be taken away from you. One of the things our officers do when they're going through baton training, and baton in our world is a level 2 training, so it's a higher level training. We don't want it to be taken away. You swing it softly and somebody grabs it, wrenches it away. They may not swing it softly back at you. So that's where we're at there. Run, hide, fight training, and we're going to talk about that, but it encourages improvised weapons. Well, a baseball bat is not intended to beat people up, so it would fall under improvised weapons within the fight stage of the training that we're currently providing. But in that is fire extinguishers, flagpoles, chairs, scissors, staplers. As we get into that, it's what's in your room as a weapon. Next slide. So our recommendation, we do not want staff to rely solely on any particular item or weapon in the training we're providing. We want it to be improvised because that's what works. So our recommendation is for the district not to issue baseball bats and not to provide baseball bat training other than maybe to baseball players. But baseball bats, there's other kinds of things that we would recommend. So baseball bats are not it. Next slide. Wasp pepper spray. So let's talk about wasp spray a little bit. It's designed to kill wasps. Now, it's got some pros. It's an improvised weapon. It's meant to kill bugs, but it can hurt people. It can shoot up to 30 feet. So that's a pretty good pro. It's an insecticide. It may require material data safety sheets, and your safety director would have to figure that out because any kind of chemicals and insecticides you're keeping, and if you're going to issue insecticide to your teachers, then it becomes an official that you're going to have to train people on how to spray people with insecticide. And then it's also highly flammable. So I don't know that we want, and okay, maybe we do, but if we have an active shooter in a school and we douse him with bug spray and then he pulls the trigger, it's flammable. He probably just lit it. But so he also lit everything else that the bug spray's on. That's not a consideration that most people talk about. I don't know if you can get non-flammable wasp spray, but there's better solutions. Next slide. Most people aren't aware of pepper spray. At the community forum, I brought it up a little bit. But in a nutshell, RCW, most government agencies, including school districts, and if you look at the OSPI website, they'll say the same thing, 14 years and older with parent permission, a student cannot be denied the ability to carry pepper spray. Now, the district can also allow its employees, in this case, the RCW I'm reading, the district cannot disallow it. Students, teachers can carry pepper spray. Now, we're going to get into some of the issues around that, but pepper spray is designed to do this job. Next slide. So let's talk the pros. It's not a dangerous weapon under the RCWs that Sergeant Garza just explained that prohibit dangerous weapons on school grounds. It can be carried by students and staff. It can hamper an active shooter. Now, you could make the argument pepper spray against a gun. Well, we're teaching run, hide, fight. So this is a tool to help, it's not the end all. So it's not going to end the shooter, but it's going to hamper them. Can be used against unarmed assailants. So if you have a student being bullied and he sprays another student, well, if he can argue why he did it and it's legal, then, I mean, it's not, I mean, this is the pros, we got some cons coming up. It fits within our run, hide, fight. Inexpensive, no training required, however recommended, and it's generally, and I should have underlined that, generally not lethal. So the cons, it will be misused by students. If students are carrying this, some student's going to think it's cool to take it out of another student's backpack and spray it. That's a problem, because the next thing is we talk about allergic reaction, eye damage, and significant risk to those with asthma. So there are medical issues around pepper spray. We don't willy-nilly spray the stuff. It's nasty. It will require cleanup and decontamination. It will affect unintended targets. If I was to spray somebody in this room, every single person in this room is going to be affected by it. Now, another con, it cannot be prevented. The law says they can carry it with parent permission. And it's only effective from 2 to 10 feet unless you get the big bear spray one. And I'm sure hoping nobody thinks it's reasonable to bring a bear spray can of pepper spray to school. So those are some of the cons to it. So the next slide. Our recommendation, educate staff on the possession and use. When can they use it? Because you can assault somebody with pepper spray and go to jail. Let's make sure we're doing this right. Consider, you can't prevent that 14-year-old with parent permission from carrying it, but consider requiring students to complete a form and provide proof that they've got that parent permission. Don't ask for it when it happens. If you're going to carry it in the school, then we want, before you carry it in the school, we want your parent permission to be on file. And then finally, consider educating those students that are carrying it about the consequences of using it. So if they do use it, and they do it inappropriately, you know, what's the consequence going to be? If they use it appropriately, well, I mean, that could be a pat on the back, but especially if it was an active shooter type scenario.
Chief, can I interject a question
Absolutely.
to Rich? As far as pepper spray goes, and OSPI agrees with this, where we have to allow it apparently with parents' permission, are we at risk? I mean, the liability that comes associated with that, is that something that y'all cover, or is that
Yeah.
something that we need to think about, or?
No, in this particular case, Chief Schenk is exactly correct. There would be, again, you know, if what we're providing to both staff as far as a recommendation and or if, you know, if we're allowing it to occur, you're going to have coverage for it.
Thank you.
Patty, correct?
Just want to make sure parents have signed forms. I mean, you need all that.
And that's why we provided that recommendation. OSPI doesn't talk on that, but there's nothing in the law that I see that would prevent the district from saying, we're not denying your ability to carry it, but if you're going to, we want this, we want to see your approval, and we keep it on file. Now, as we start talking run, hide, fight, pepper spray on a school teacher could actually be pretty beneficial to us. So Officer Carlson, our school resource officer, and I have taught run, hide, fight a whole bunch of times in this district. In fact, some of the most fun I've had is in this building watching Mr. Wiseman tackle Dr. Hurst in our training. That was a great day for me.
Just to correct that, I think it was the other way around.
The other way around?
Yes.
I think we need to do it again. Okay. I think we need to do it again.
And yes, we do have it on video.
That was a great day.
That may need to be an intermission in a future meeting, right?
It was quite entertaining. So it was spectacular. I can't say enough about it. It was a football takedown. It was great. So Officer Carlson's going to talk a bit about, and we're going to go into the next slide, which is training. So training within our district and some of the things that we're recommending that could actually save lives and address some of these safety issues. And that's why we bring up Run, Hide, Fight. And Seth and I are very dedicated to Run, Hide, Fight within our district. We think we've heard it called all different kinds of things. In fact, I think Officer Carlson's been to some of the name brand trainings. We boil it down to Run, Hide, Fight and call it that because that's what people can remember. So, Seth, please.
So thank you for having us. I just want to start out by saying I commend the school district for being proactive about having some of this training within our school district. I often go to trainings throughout the state, and we lead the state in a lot of these things, the Run, Hide, Fight, the TAC Med, so I commend you on that. Next year I'll have 3 daughters in this school district, and something I hold real dear to my heart is I take every day that I suit up and I go into our schools, I take my job very seriously. And one of my biggest fears is not being at the right place at the right time. And as you know, with only one SRO, trying to make all the different buildings throughout the day is nearly impossible. And that's why I believe so strongly in this Run, Hide, Fight training, because it causes everybody to be a first responder to a critical incident. And I'll talk a little bit about Run, Hide, Fight here in a second, but something that I want you to understand under high stress situations is people, if they've never been trained in how to perform under stress, they will go code black. They will fail because they don't have anything to fall back on. Some of you all have probably been under high stress situations and you just forget what to do. We see it traditionally with parents and choking children, and they just lock up nurses. Some of the moms are doctors, nurses, and they just panic because they just don't know what to do under high stress. The importance of Run, Hide, Fight is getting that information out to our kids, keeping it simple. So under a stressful situation, we learned a lot from Columbine. The time delay of getting officers into that school was hours. And fast forward to today, we know that there's certain things we can do to keep our kids safe. And one of them is Run, Hide, Fight. So Run, Hide, Fight it's not any sequential order. It can be run, it can be fight, it can be hide, but it's the steps that you would take for an active shooter event. And we have seen historically through many different active shooter events that it works. If you lock and barricade a door, statistically it hasn't been breached. The shooter hasn't breached the classroom. So at any rate, running. So what we'd be teaching our kids, obviously getting away from the threat is the best thing to do, right? If I can run out of this building and get as far away from a shooter, that's the smartest thing to do. But in the event that I can't do that, obviously I want to lock and barricade that door by moving objects, securing the door. The primary agenda of an active shooter is mass casualties. And if you can slow that down, usually with a locked and barricaded door, they move on to a threat that is more vulnerable or accessible. And then lastly, fighting. And we're not asking our kids to turn into ninjas, but basic concepts of swarming the bad guy. And the reason I keep saying he or the bad guy is because traditionally it is a male shooter. We're asking the students to move as a team in subduing someone. Just like in police work, it often takes numerous officers to subdue a suspect. And so we're asking kids to come together, and it's called the swarm method, where one kid grabs a limb to subdue the bad guy. And there's a whole bunch that goes into it. That's kind of it in the gist of it. But again, I can't stress enough that if we don't give our kids the tools to fall back under high-stress situations, they're going to panic. We saw it in the Pulse nightclub where people hid under tables. They had an opportunity to run, and they didn't. They just sat under the table and ended up dying. So I personally take this very passionately because I have kids in this school district, and I can't probably be there if something bad was to happen. Also, what we've been seeing is police departments throughout the country they've been doing a really good job at neutralizing the threat, but we haven't been providing the training on what to do with students that have been injured or shot. And that brings me into tactical med. And can you hand me that real quick? You know, something just as simple as this, you can get on Amazon. It's a tourniquet and chest seals. And this isn't everything that goes into a TAC med bag or an IFAC kit, but this device here, just a tourniquet, could save someone's life. We just saw it down in Florida where, we just saw this down in Florida where a young lady put these in all the classrooms, and sure enough, there was a shooting at the school, and having these in each classroom probably saved these kids' lives. And then chest seals. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of whatever that is, but the bottom line, after the event of an active shooter, we have to have staff prepared to help our kids. Again, these are teachers see their students every day, and then one day something like this happens. Can you imagine how overwhelming that is to see? I mean, you're intimate with these kids, but we got to be able to provide them the training to stop the bleeding, because that's what kids are dying from. They're not actually dying from being shot; they're dying from bleeding out. So with this simple tool right here, we can actually save lives.
So I'm going to prompt Officer Carlson real quick, but we've provided run, hide, fight training to all of the teachers, administrators, superintendent, you name it, within the district. Our recommendation is that we roll this out with students. We've done this a little bit with a couple class or DOHS students, as well as a couple high school classrooms. Our recommendation is that we want to roll this out high school, middle school, and a modified version at the elementary schools. Now, as we've done it at the high school, the kids have taken it completely serious, saying, why didn't we learn this years ago? And we're not, I mean, when we're talking fighting and barricading, look around this room. Are there weapons in this room? Absolutely. We're sitting on a whole bunch of them. We can improvise. Could we barricade the doors in this room if we needed to? Absolutely. Looks like that table moves. I think that table moves, a bunch of those moves. We pile them against those doors. So that's, what's the average response time for law enforcement in the United States?
I think 6 minutes.
That was 3. Last lockdown that we had, we were at the middle school within 48 seconds. Now, if we're not, by putting SROs in the school, that's not going to guarantee every school is safe. But with run, hide, fight training, the idea is buy us some time to get there. We're training all of our officers in what's called active shooter drills. When we know there's an active shooter in the school, every police officer from miles around is heading to that school. And their job is to go in and take care of the bad guy. Now, if we can help teachers and staff figure out, how do I protect my kids for a couple minutes? And that's where pepper spray can come in. But let's say we barricaded this room. We couldn't run out in time. If you can run away, run away. But if we then barricade, if someone is intent on getting into this room, chances are they're going to find a way. So that's where we then organize, how are we going to fight that person? Pepper spray can work, the flagpole can work. As we start going around this room, there's other weapons, chairs, distractions. And so we're actually going through practically and showing people how to do this. Now, would we do that with elementary school kids?
No, no, we wouldn't teach elementary kids to fight.
They're already doing it on the playgrounds. But realistically, the teacher can improvise that when they're barricaded. Now okay guys, here, we're gonna talk about this. If the bad guy comes through the door, we've done everything we can to block it, then, and you've got some 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, it's like, I need you guys to grab some reams of paper, throw them at him when he comes in the door. I need you 2 big guys to grab those chairs and clobber him with them. And that's where we train the teacher to improvise and mobilize those kids. Now, the idea being, buy us some time, and we're gonna get there. We want that person wandering up and down empty halls. But the traditional response of a lockdown, where we turn off the lights, shut the doors, and we all clump together in a corner, doesn't work. It's dangerous. You're concentrating a target. You're making it easy for a bad guy to hit multiple targets per shot, and you're creating sheep. We think that's ineffective. We don't want to do that. Now, a couple of our recommendations as we go, we tailor it for each age group. We provide it to the parents. Maybe we do a forum at each school and we invite the parents to come for that training. And then if they insist, let them opt their kids out. But the majority of the parents, I believe, will not opt their kids out. And this actually could work to help create some safety within our schools.
So, question on training. So, Desert Oasis is a much smaller campus than all of the others. What would be the ideal numbers? Like a grade at a time at the elementary school? So maybe 100 students? I mean, have you
I hate to put it this way, and I've discussed it a little bit with some principals, and this is why one of the obstacles to rolling it out, say we took prep time and we could boil this down to a 30 to 40 minute block. And if we looked at the middle school, it would be we would do each classroom individually, because, one of the suggestions was bring everybody in the gym. Can you imagine trying to teach the gym to do this? We need them in their classroom looking around what is available to me.
Okay.
And so it would be the 25 kids that are in that classroom. We would create a cadre of instructors, and then if we hit those prep times, we could probably knock it out in a week per school.
The scenario-based portion of the training is probably the most important. So the kids actually see that they can clear a whole classroom within seconds and run, or to barricade a door within seconds. And if they've never practiced it, they might not know. Again,
Right.
it's resorting back to what you've done under stress.
Okay. Thank you.
So that's that recommendation. Any questions on that?
I have a question. When you were talking about being trained, do you guys do specific trainings at each school? Like, have you been to the middle school, like when there's no students in there and you're like, okay, this is our plan of attack if there's an active shooter, or you've been to the high school? Have you done any specific on-site training?
Yes, ma'am. We have trained our active shooter, our teams in each of these schools, whether they're at night or during holidays. Spring break, we are actually scheduled to be in one of the schools, and I forget which school that was, and we'll be training again. We try not to do it when there's teachers present because we don't want to scare anybody.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you.
The run, hide, fight, though, that's generally Monday mornings with the late start, and we're taking that entire time.
Yeah.
Hard part's catching subs, because we really don't know who they are until the school year starts. Okay, so moving on. Thank you, Seth. Yes, sir. Moving on, one of the next things that we've been doing, and actually I want to touch on the last of the the training. Seth has also been doing cyber training with parents. We would offer to gear that up a little bit more, getting the right attendance or times to get people there. It's amazing what these kids are doing with their cell phones and the stuff that they're looking at, and they're hiding it from their parents. And what I've heard Seth say is, ask your kid to see their Snapchat or their Instagram, and then ask them to show you the one that they don't show you, because most of these kids have two. And that's not something we're used to. And then Finally, on the training, the last piece is I really would like to get DARE back in our schools. So we're working towards that. The new DARE curriculum looks very good. The old DARE curriculum, we liked it. We all thought it was great. It had some weaknesses, especially in small urban cities where we were educating kids on what drugs to use. The new training doesn't accomplish that, thank goodness. So it's an improvement. And
Can you come up with what does DARE stand for?
Drug Awareness Resistance Education. So it's basically you're making the kids aware, but you're also building some pro-socials so that they understand how to say no.
Thank you.
Vulnerability assessments, I'm going to talk real quick on that, and then I'm going to turn it over here to Sergeant McFarland for one of the final blocks. But we've been doing vulnerability assessments in our schools. These are very extensive assessment where we spend days looking at that school, and that's why it's taking so long. We probably should be doing these and scheduling these every couple years at each school so that once things are changed or improved, we can go back and see if it's stuck. Basically, there's 4 major blocks that we look at. You know, the exterior of the school, the inner perimeter, the actual school in itself, and then we look at a policy review where we're looking at the emergency operation plans as well as the student handbook and the staff handbook to see if they're all consistent. So Greg and I and Seth have all been trained to do this. They take a bunch of time, but I think they're well worth doing. And then it's a matter of providing the school then a list of considerations that they can go through, prioritize, maybe pick the low-hanging fruit, and make some improvements that are actually good for our safety. Now we're going to move into the next, which is crime prevention through environmental design. Sergeant McFarland is our expert on that, so I'm turning it over to him. Feel free.
Okay, so Chief wanted me to discuss with you guys the concept of CPTED. And like he said, it's an acronym for Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. What I really like about this topic is I've gotten the opportunity to employ it in different areas of the city, like some of our businesses and some of our neighborhoods. I've presented this to neighborhood watch groups, and I've actually seen these concepts actually work, essentially. And what crime prevention through environmental design is just that, using your existing environment to help suppress or deter crime. Can we go back to when we talk about these topics, like more fences, more cameras, and more stuff like that, more presence in the schools, I think a lot of parents get concerned where it says here, fortification versus CPTED. I don't want our schools to look like a prison. I worked in the prison system for 7 years before I became a police officer. Like Officer Carlson said, most of us have kids that go to school here, and we don't want building more fences. Our intent isn't to make it look like a prison or a fortress. So I just wanted to share that. If you wouldn't mind going to the next slide, please. So there's going to be three concepts with environmental design. The first one's going to be natural access control. The next one's going to be natural surveillance, and the other one's going to be territorial. The thing about all these concepts is they kind of coexist. So when we talk about fencing, we could talk about that in every section. I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to give you kind of guys an overview of what each one is. Excuse me. So natural access control, essentially what that is you want to use your environment for physical guidance, if that makes sense. So an example of that, larger sidewalks leading to the main entrance. And the hope with that is to lead the kids a certain way. I think with McFarland Middle School, it does a pretty good job. We talk later, I'm getting ahead of myself. The celebrated entrance, that's describing really pronouncing the entrance of your school. And I think like with McFarland Middle School, it's pretty clear where the entrance is. We're at the high school. If you're not familiar with the high school, You may or may not know, depending on if you go inside. If you go inside the high school, it's very clear. If you go into the main entrance, that's the main entrance, because you have your foyer, you have your visitor check-in and that. And whereas with McFarland, it's very clear, but like an example of revamping the excited utterance. When I drove through there earlier today on my shift, there's a crosswalk north and south, and I think the intent, and I work night shift normally, but normally we drop our students off in that path right there, right, Chief? And so my thought was, right in front of the main doors, make one crosswalk there. You wouldn't be disrupting traffic. Where the crosswalks are now, they're kind of disrupting traffic because they're before the parking lot. And you could build kind of like what we have in front of City Hall, like a brick entrance, and really pronounce where the entrance is. That's just an idea. I'm not saying we should or shouldn't do that, but that just gives you an idea of what the celebrated entrance is, if that makes sense.
Picture Walmart. You drive up to Walmart, where's the front door? Well, there's a big shape over it. So you don't, I mean, if you are just walking, you're naturally gonna walk to that, not the garden center. So same thing works with schools. You create a really celebrated entrance so that people know where they're supposed to go. Now, if you're behind Walmart, most of you, I can probably ask who's been in the back of Walmart, probably nobody here has ever been to the back side of Walmart. But if you do, it's not friendly. There's no, it's like, where do I go in? I mean, it's designed not to be friendly. So that's the idea, same thing with schools. Big front sidewalk leading to the main entrance. So psychologically, people know where to go. But smaller sidewalks for where the kids are moving around normally.
I think we're good on that. Let me look real quick here if I wanted to, like the foyer, like at the high school where we have the double doors and then those doors to, I mean, that makes it real clear that that's the main entrance, where there's several there's a hallway, there's the entrance to the gym where that's kind of more wide open, if that makes sense. We can.
The purpose being, you walk in the front of the high school, there's another set of doors right in front of you. So a visitor is going to stop and look around a little bit, then they see that they need to check in. If you were to walk in the gym or one of the other front entrances, you're not going to be observed. If a kid pops that door and you walk, and I've seen with a bunch of students, they actually use those doors to sneak in unobserved. We don't want anybody doing things unobserved. So that's kind of, as we start talking, that leads into your next one.
That leads into the, if you wouldn't mind moving on. So natural surveillance, the way I explain this at my neighborhood watch groups is you just want bad guy to be seen, however that may be done. In this case, it's gonna be our visitors and students, that make them feel like they're being observed.
And good guys, they're good guys.
And good guys, employees, everybody. Statistically speaking, with SEPTED, if someone feels like they're being seen, like an example of this at a business, I don't want to pick on a business, so I won't say the name. One of our gas stations has all of its windows closed. Whereas me as a patrolman, if I'm driving by and all the windows are open, I can just drive by and see if something's going wrong in there. If the windows are all closed with advertisements and stuff like that, no one's gonna know what's going on from the outside. They're only gonna know what's going on the inside. So ways to counter this, or to help natural surveillance in our schools, stuff Chief and I talked about is just opening your blinds, keeping doors open, keeping more presence in hallways. We've even talked about, I'm not saying to do this, but like paintings where it's a person and there's big eyes there, and it'll give the person perception that they're being looked at as they walk in. That's kind of a wild idea, but.
Spokane's done that really well under some of the underpasses. If you notice where you see these like runners and stuff where they're looking at you, that's a SEPTED principle that's done on purpose because people commit less crime when they believe they're being watched. And it doesn't matter that it's a picture of somebody looking at you, you still feel like you're being watched.
Let's see here. Blinds open, I said that. Staff in hallways would help with students and everyone knowing they're being seen. Like at the middle school, I saw that they put a, what is that called, Chief?
Ribbon.
A ribbon. there just to guide people closer over to the office. And I think that's an example of natural surveillance or controlling where people are going. I think that naturally the people in the office naturally going to look up and see what's going on because the person's coming towards them. Whereas if someone entered the middle school without that being there, they're going to hug that wall and they could essentially just walk right through. So I really like that, whoever decided to do that, Chief. Yeah, so that's natural surveillance in a nutshell. Just the way I explain it again is making people think that they're being seen, and that can be done in several different ways. Cameras is a good one too. Territoriality, basically, like it says here, making a clear definition between what's public and what's private. The Department of Homeland Security, the Florida and California Department of Education have done a lot of research in this, and statistically with territoriality, it gives the students more ownership of that body, and so they're less likely to commit crimes, say graffiti and whatnot, when they feel ownership of that area. Signs, fences, shrubs, and trees, and then I wanted to talk about here what we're enforcing. Do we allow cars to use other cars to use bus lanes behind the high school? Do we allow parents to drive in teachers' parking? Do we allow students to stand in landscaping? And do students park correctly? That's stuff I'm not sure if it's getting enforced or not, but that's stuff that's going to help with the territoriality of the school. Shrubs and stuff, like I was thinking about it, the high school has a lot of grass in front of the high school where I see kids cutting through it. I'm not saying to do this, but an idea could be to replace that grass with pea gravel or beauty bark or something and make a bunch of plants in there and make it clear that we don't want people to walk through there. And then if someone is walking through there, that'll bring our eyes up and the school employees' eyes to that area, and we'll say, well, that guy's out of place, if that makes sense.
And that's the psychology of it. If you think about, and I want to kind of speed this up a little. If you think about your front yard, you have a front door, you have windows on the front of your house, you generally have some landscaping right outside, then you have grass, then you have a sidewalk. If somebody's walking on the sidewalk in front of your house, they're not a threat. That's a public area. If they're walking on your lawn, that's semi-public, semi-private. They start becoming a threat to you, and you start watching, what is he doing in my grass? Now, if they're standing outside your window in your landscaping, they're a threat. Now, that's psychologically. So if we think about it as we're designing and we're doing the work around our schools, we don't want it to be the norm for kids and visitors to think that it's okay to stand right outside the principal's office window. That you use sidewalks, that if you're stepping onto the grass in a front area, that it's for a purpose. We also don't want to see where there's pathways where people have found if I walk across the grass here, I can get to my other wing faster. The idea being, if people are staying where they're supposed to be, they're going to stay where the majority of people will stay where they're supposed to be the majority of the time. And you're still going to have outliers, but Disney is the expert at this. If you think about Disneyland, they're the expert at controlling people's movement. And a lot of these same principles are that.
All right, can we move to the next slide, please? So the next slide is maintenance, and it's basically, we've listed these things here. It's common sense, just maintaining the area we're in control of. And I wish I had a visual aid, but in the presentation I do to the businesses in our community, I show a house, they're similar, and one has like shrubs in front of it that aren't well maintained or upkept. And that house, like some of the shrubs are blocking some of the windows. And so so you're eliminating that natural surveillance. And so the other picture shows a house with well-kept and maintained shrubs to help all aspects of SEPTED. What else do I want to do? so it's just maintenance, keeping up on your stuff. I want to talk about cameras. There's a lot of places in our community that have like a really nice camera system, and we show up on a call and the people don't know how to actually use them or get the information I need. So I think it's important for the school district to have several people that are very familiar with the camera system in case I don't know who even controls the camera system right now, but if a if it's just one person and that person was sick that day or on vacation or something, and I know in some, I can't remember where, but there was an active shooter situation where someone was able to access the camera feed and basically be there live, and they were able to relay that information where the guy was in real time, and that's very, very valuable. And so that's the big thing I like to say on the camera systems. Like I said, a lot of people have the nice fancy camera systems but have no idea how to actually get the information. And in a critical incident, it's very important to get that to law enforcement. And then lights, there's a thing called using the right kind of light, and I could go into a whole different presentation on this, but just for the schools especially, like a circular light where light's coming out from the top, that's actually causing light pollution is the term for it, and so it's not really effective. And so using the right kind of lighting, I like the directional lighting that's really going to illuminate the path and the different blind spots we have, like behind the high school at night, there's several blind spots back there. You got anything else, boss?
So think about maintenance too. That's your ownership of your property. So are there sections, and I don't, none of this is being overly critical, and if the vulnerability assessments, we actually identify one of these, but think about the baseball batting cage area at the high school. There's a rotting down building inside of it, and there's garbage kind of around it. And that's been pretty routine while I've been here. I don't think it's used. But what that message is that's unclaimed space. Now, unclaimed space is where people generally go to commit crime. Think there's no lighting, obviously the landowner doesn't care about it. Our schools are really well maintained. So it's hard to find examples of that. But that's the point of the maintenance. And I'm gonna wrap this up real quick. Next slide. Okay, so culture. That's one of the easy things or hard things and easy things to fix. We've hit some really easy things. We've hit some really tough subjects here. Culture can be both. Now, I played it dirty on all of your principals earlier this school year, and I sent an undercover person into every one of your schools to see if they would be contacted. And the simple thing is that I'm looking for is, are they seen when they're walking in, but also if they are seen, are they contacted? Well, we're gonna try that again and hope it's better. But the point there is let's change the culture so whenever something looks out of place, if there's somebody walking in the building looking around, obviously they don't know where they are, contact them. If we can get that kind of a culture change. If kids are parking backed in or taking up 2 parking spots at the high school, that's easy things to address, but it says we care. And they need to believe we care. ID badges. One of the things that Greg Foltz and I have been talking about is some kind of screening system. And maybe there's grant money, I don't know, but some kind of screening system. The people come in, it scans their driver's license, checks to see if they're a registered sex offender, prints out a little ID badge for them that fades over time. So they can't reuse it the next day. Those kind of things could be easy. Metal detectors, no. I think that's an absolute, and I wanted you to hear that from me. Metal detectors are an absolute waste of money for why we would want them. So that goes back to what's it going to protect? If a person is intent on harming our kids, they're going to shoot the person standing by the metal detector, and they don't care if it beeps when they walk under it. So it's not going to accomplish anything. Don't waste the money, and then you're going to have to post somebody standing by it. Fences. Would we start looking at CPTED and crime prevention through environmental design? A 1-foot fence can change behavior. Do we need to put up 10-foot chain link fences with concertina wire all around our schools? My answer is no. It's not going to improve safety. In fact, with the run part of run, hide, fight, it may be causing us additional consequences because these kids are running into a fence and now they're a concentrated target again. Now, they would keep out the dogs. They would keep out the mental crazy guy that wants to harass our girls. So there's some benefits. But what are we looking for? Now, there's areas you don't want people. I would say on the backside where the cafeteria staff or the maintenance staff are entering, fences are perfect because you don't generally have kids and people legitimately walking around in those areas. So fences are a very deliberate conversation. Maybe it's to keep the balls from rolling out in the street. So fences have some good value. But if you're talking about keeping kids safe, Parkland School in Florida was a fenced school. Didn't do a darn bit of good. Walls in the foyer. Middle school accomplished most of what we're wanting by putting a ribbon to force people to walk close to the desk so they can be seen and observed. The foyer at the high school does exactly that. There's other schools that we should be looking at those kind of fixes to try to make sure that people that are legitimately there are being directed to get their visitor tags and come in appropriately. And then the final thing I want to talk about is surveillance and security cameras. And I want to point out the difference. A surveillance camera has somebody watching it. A security camera is recording people. The studies that we look at, and we have way too many video camera or screens that my dispatchers are watching every day. But I think they can watch about 9 different screens and maybe catch something in front of them. But when you're trying to watch 100 cameras as it zips through, you're not going to catch people doing bad. So the point is, have the cameras, have them recording, so that once the crime is, or the school rule violation is made, the staff can go back and look at it. That's valuable. But just adding cameras and adding cameras and adding cameras is not a fix. So they need to be deliberate and then, of course, maintained. That is our presentation. So we're here for questions as you have them. I did go over what I promised by 10 minutes. But have at it.
Thank you.
He asked for
Yeah.
any questions. I appreciate.
You all look at me, thank you for, all looking at me. I think that we hit through all of our
We
questions
usually start
in
at
the
the
middle of
end,
it.
Jen. That's the only reason.
That's
why we
not
let
why,
it go
because
there.
I ask a lot of questions, right?
And Mrs. Stevenson was successful in getting me to start using a mic.
See?
by
Very
the end
good.
of
Yeah,
this.
right.
Very good. No, I appreciate the information, Chief, and all of you guys that are here tonight. We have decisions to make. I appreciate the information. As one board member, it'll bring this into a better focus. Just some of the simple stuff that you guys have brought on as recommendations aesthetically might be a point of start. Some of the other issues are a little more complex, would entail more discussion, of course. I appreciate the fact that you guys were very thorough. I know that the firearm issue was at the last forum we had, and though it may not be as boisterous anymore, it's still in the back of most of our minds. Maybe not everyone, but I know it's discussed. And anytime we hear of a shooting incident, whether it's at a school or not, it comes back to the forefront. So due diligence is that we don't think it's never not going to happen here, or that, things that have been done at a national level are the end all. There isn't an end all, as we've learned tonight, with anything for that matter. But no, appreciate the information. Definitely gives us, like I said, a lot of stuff to chew on, and hopefully here soon, when our safety policy is up for changes or amendments or modifications, we can take some of this information, some of these recommendations, and hopefully put some stuff into policy that just makes our district safer. I mean, because that's what we're after. I appreciate the candor of some of the officers where they bring their feelings, their emotions into it because they're vested in it 100%. And if you ask me today what's the most important thing to me, it's my children, well, my grandchildren now too, but premature twins at 31 weeks, they're doing great. Just got to throw that in there. No, thank you very much. Appreciate you guys being here tonight. Having said that, don't know if there's any further questions for the OPD. Thank you very much. Chris, you got a presentation in here, I guess. The district also has an update for us, the board, so Chris will go into that now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have Amy and then Greg come up. They're going to speak about
Thank you.
specifically-
Sorry, Chris. Thank you also to the folks from
Clear risk.
Clear Risk. Appreciate you guys being here and appreciate your input as well.
Thank you.
Where'd go, catch?
They need 2 mics there, Chief, so Jen doesn't tell them.
I think they've been well-trained, that they know.
So we're going to turn it over to Amy and Greg for EL 16, elements 1 through 4.
You want me to start? Yeah. All right. Well, I think he started off well with the good statistic that 1% of the issues in school are going to be violence or active shooters. So what Greg and I get to think about is the other 99% is kind of how I look at it. And we work well together. We, a couple of years ago, kind of merged on this book that you're looking at. It's our Bible. And we had a good crisis plan, but Greg was sort of tasked in updating it, making sure it was user-friendly. And then I bombed in and added all the prevention and the things around that. And so we love our little book that's 200,000 pages. It's not that many, but everything's in one place. That was one of our goals. So as far as EL 16 goes, we have kind of 4 bullets. And the first one, I don't necessarily need to read, but I kind of think of it as our training one, to make sure that we are in compliance with that. So we're pretty proud of the things that we've added in the last few years. I have an amazing group of all of these OPD guys, our CBHA and Adams County support. Whoever I ask in this town, they come, they show up, and they help us kind of guide through what we need. So as far as the prevention handbook, just know that our staff, top to bottom is trained in this. And as far as this part of the EL, very specifically, we try to bring attention to those things that were listed. We brought a lot of prevention into this. And so it made us not only know what we already had in place, but where our gaps were and what we needed to add to it. We make sure that our staff knows how to identify and respond to warning signs. So I think a lot about prevention and the things about social and emotional learning and how we can start at a very young age building relationships with our kids and creating the culture that nobody wants to be violent and that they're happy and safe here. So all of the things that we have put into place are kind of a response to that. Our school threat assessment response protocol was created based on what the Secret Service told us to do, what other districts around the whole country have worked on. And basically, again, and I have an awesome team that I can pull together at a moment's notice to assess a threat that might happen in a school. Typically, it would be one student to another student or a student to a teacher or something that we saw or heard on social media that was a threat. And we go through a really specific protocol and determine if that student poses a threat or is a threat, and then we go into interventions and things that are needed. So that's something that we're proud of, that our principals respect and support, that we just know that everything's really well thought through. I don't need to necessarily go through all of these things, but one of the best things that Greg and I know it's been covered is when our staff has to do those modules, the safe school modules, and they typically are safety things, facility things that Greg has put into place. But 2 years ago, we added a bully recognition and response piece that's really good, really well done, and then student mental health. And so it asks our staff to really think about students' mental health, not just, kind of who shows up to you physically in front of you, but how are we tapping into what kind of a day they're having and what's going on at home, and then how are we responding to it? We can go on. We've created some forms, and we had a lot of feedback on consistency. There were certain pieces around referrals and child abuse reporting that we were doing differently maybe in every building, even between the two high schools. So our counselors, our psychologists, and kind of the support group all know we have one referral form that we use now, and we made it in tandem with CBHA and Adams County so that it covers everything that everybody needs, and it can be done really quickly. Another thing that's fairly new is our social emotional learning system in the district. A team of, 20 or 30 people from inside and outside the district worked for a whole year on researching everything about social emotional learning. And basically, we've determined that if you're thinking about a pyramid, this is at the foundation. If a student can't come to school ready to learn because, physical and emotional needs are met, and they know somebody cares about them, and they know somebody will notice if they're missing or they're hurt or they're not feeling good, that we can address that. And so our goal is that by the time they leave the Othello School District, all kids will have built relationships with adults, with each other. We will respect one another and be good humans. So every building has its own kind of flavor around this, but we do have district expectations. We've adopted the Washington state standards around this. And last summer, the state put out grade band expectations. It's really, really good stuff. It tells us there's 6 pillars of social emotional learning, and one might be like social awareness. And it tells us what kindergartners should know about social awareness all the way through like teenagers and then even adults. So it really gives us a target, and then we get to think about the climate and culture in each building and how we can meet those standards. Our counselors, we have phenomenal counselors in our school district. They meet monthly now and identify needs, gaps. They work together, they share ideas. We've put them through all kinds of training, and I love that they ask for the training. They might say, I need to brush up on suicide prevention, and so we bring somebody in and everybody engages. They work very, very well together. Along with our local agencies and our community partnerships. Again, I can pull in a panel of 10 people in a pretty short notice that can all talk about nutrition if we need to, or bullying, or what do these 5th grade boys need? Let's pull in a resource and figure it out. So I'm proud of that with our school district, and always open for ideas and things that are going on. Okay, the next slide, I think we're splitting. Element 2 is again about prevention and physical threats to students and staff. So some of the things we've put into place here are, our threat assessment, teaching teachers. When you see a student that might be emotionally distressed, we kind of have a flow chart. I don't like to hear when parents or students or teachers even say, well, I told so-and-so and they didn't do anything, because I always know that's not true. So we can now target where is a student in the process of referral, or what we know when one person's been told, I know I can believe that they've followed this flow chart. So those are kind of communication things that I think are really good for our school district. Gaggle, counseling services. Are you going to talk about Gaggle?
I refer that to Rigo.
Okay. We have some great anonymous reporting systems. But even better than our anonymous reporting systems, they can call a phone number or whatever. I think we have great relationships. I get texts all the time, or notes or whatever that says, hey, so-and-so needs a check in on this kid, or what should I do in this situation? And I think that that's what we have going for us in a small town. And we get right on it and we act. So some of our things, I can show you a flow chart or a list, but it's truly about relationships and knowing who to call and networking.
Can we ask questions as
Yes.
you're doing this? And just because I see Marion behind us over here, thank you for being here, Marion. Are bus drivers trained in this? Are parapros? Are the people serving lunch? The gals in the office or guys? Everybody
Everybody.
is trained in
Yeah.
these things you're talking,
Yep.
okay? Thank you.
You're up. ID badges.
Yeah, I wish I could talk as good as you and the chief. I'm not a good presenter.
Okay.
We do require all visitors to check in at the office and receive an ID badge. You should see a visitor's badge on anybody that's in the building that's not supposed to be there. We currently don't require staff to, but we're working on it. It's not a requirement. We encourage it. It's provided to them by the photo company. We perform all our necessary emergency drills as required by the state. Fire, lockdown, modified lockdown, earthquake, shelter in place. No one's missed a beat on this. We're doing at least one a month, if not two, depending on what happens. There's signage posted everywhere throughout the buildings. Sometimes they get taken down. We put them back up. That's just the way things go. We do have video surveillance. 335 cameras, I think we're at now, Rigo, roughly. They are all recording. We have backups on them. We do utilize them for surveillance. We go back and, or not surveillance, but security. We utilize them for security. Go back and look at them as needed. Our security does throughout the day at the middle school and the high school. We'll use them for surveillance if they have a specific area they need to watch and they don't need their presence there. I mean, there is something to be said about not standing in the area. Things tend not to happen when you do, and you want to catch something. So they do get used minimally for that. Our security specialists, they continuously monitor our campuses, and they're doing a great job. I really appreciate all three of them that we have. I wish we had more. I mean, they do a great job. They make the connections with the kids that some teachers don't get to make. They have some insight into what the kids are doing that administrators don't see, and they're also there as that extra person to help with the things.
So you said 3. What campuses and how?
We have 2 at the high school and 1 at the middle school currently.
Okay. Back on the, you talked about signage.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you had mentioned sometimes they get taken down. I know that when there's something that's constantly there, it becomes invisible.
Yep.
So sometimes they intentionally get relocated? Or is that only just?
Or get remade, or sometimes they get taken down by a student, stand there playing, sometimes they get remade. If I see something that I've seen there over and over again, I might make a suggestion to hey, let's make it, I used the word spruce it up a little bit a couple weeks ago, and someone said, what's that mean? I don't know what it means either, but make it stand out a little bit more, make it a little more prevalent. So, we have signage all over our schools that says visitor parking here, parent parking here, and most of us don't see it because it's there every day, so you have a great observation there. Safe schools training, wow, mandates from the state. I think we're up to 8 hours of training in a year for most of our staff, some more, some less. We developed a 3-year plan last year to try to hit all the mandated training that was needed, everything that was required by OSPI, by the state, recommended by our insurance company, and it's continually changing. We've added to it this year, we've taken some off, so that's not going to go away, and unfortunately, we have lots of concerns about the online training, Safe Schools online training, but it gets the message out there. If people pay attention, it's there, the information's there. Incident command training, all of our administrators are incident command certified in Incident Command 100. This year we currently haven't done any sit-down tabletops, but we did it all last year with all the current administrators. I think we only have 2 new administrators this year that we need to follow up with. So,
what happens if an administrator is not on site and there's an incident that takes place? Is there like a backup person?
They're in their incident command training as part of the ICS 100. They would identify anyone that could take someone else's place. So when we sit down and do a tabletop with them, we'll give them a incident command tree. Like, here's your administrator, your incident commander, and then we say, who would you have do this job? Okay, who would you have do it if that person's not here? Who would you have do it if that person's not here? At least 2 backups. If the administrator's not in the building, they've already identified someone, hey, you're in charge while I'm gone. They're not gonna be the one that's gonna decide everything, but they should at least get them going in the right direction till someone else can show up that might assume that role. Okay, school resource officer. You heard from our police officers and the great job that they did with their presentation. Board presentation, just much like tonight, it's YouTube Live. It's to our public. Everything that was tonight is a great education for everyone here. And then inside this document, we did create an emergency guide for parents, just a 1-page that we, if we have to, we can send out to everyone. I can't remember what page it's on. Let's see if I can direct you to the right page. Of course, it's not on the...
We tried to do several one-pagers so they could be easily pulled out. So like all the emergency phone numbers, 1 page, and I see those posted around the district. It's nice. We have a 1-pager for all kind of the support agencies in town, because new people often ask that, or they don't know where to go for juvenile services or whatever. So this is kind of the same thing. This is the one that's got like parent relocation if we were to have to do an evacuation, that kind of thing. So when we train at the beginning of the year, we bring these out, laminate them, give everybody the 411.
Is it B4?
Page 89.
B4? Tips for parents to help create, no, safe schools. I don't think that's what you wanted.
Here's the flow chart.
It's just a quick 1-page document that just gives a parent an idea of what they should do in a crisis. There it is, page 72. Lets them know what our basic protocols are, basic receiving sites, and reunification procedures if there was a crisis within the school. So.
I'll say element 3, a lot of what have been talked about by Chief and his staff covers element 3, the training piece, and really considering those options on whether or not our recommendation to the board is going to be either having staff armed or having armed security guards or having an SRO. I will share with you none of what the Chief shared is a surprise because we work very closely with him. So he's been involved in all these conversations with Greg, Amy, and myself. So when he came and he shared those recommendations, they were not surprises. And we embrace all of the recommendations. I think our next step is to really, there's some big ticket items in there, and I've shared with each of you some of the decisions that the board's gonna have to make about funding and how we're gonna fund some of those options. I know I've had conversations with our Director of Finance about having another SRO because that was the recommendation. So really looking at a funding option for that, and I know the Chief said, well, he can apply for the grant. We're not sure if he's gonna be awarded that grant, but really planning on our district moving that direction as a recommendation. But again, our next steps is to really have Greg take all of those recommendations, sit down with the executive team, including Jeanette, and then us really going to the board and saying, okay, here's the recommendations that were shared, and here's potential funding options for you to consider. And then at that point, the board's gonna have to consider, okay, how do we fund these options? And again, we'll have to explore everything. But really, that's what element 3 is about, and the time that Chief spent, he really did an excellent job in really going over element 3. Element 4 is really the book that you were just handed, a comprehensive plan. But that was our presentation, so we know our next steps. Our next steps is to really come to you with, here it is, how do we move forward as a board and as a district?
I don't know if you know right offhand, but do you know approximately how much it costs us to have a SRO?
I think we're paying approximately $50,000 right now, Chief? Yep.
Okay, per year?
So, per year. So that's the conversation we've already had in the executive cabinet with Jeanette. So thinking about that cost and knowing what the recommendation was going to be, how do we make sure that that's in our budget moving forward for next year? So we'll be coming to you with, these were the recommendations, here's potential funding plan, and then for you to make a decision to approve or not.
Currently, students don't have to wear ID badges anymore. I know that was a must several years ago, and then they didn't have to do them anymore.
Currently, no, they are not being required to wear ID badges.
Is it a hindrance, or is it, I don't know what your reasonings were to take it away.
My reason, I didn't make that decision. That was administration staff at the school sites that did it. My conversations was it was just becoming a huge headache for enforcement.
At the high school, I know that.
At the high school, if you're constantly hounding them about this ID badge over and over and over again,
It's wasted time.
Yeah, there's better things to do. You got to pick your battles.
I had heard, yeah. I just didn't know what the reasoning was in the younger grades, if that was something we needed.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily think in elementary school that an ID badge is for a student's going to be that great of an idea. They're
just saw
always
my
running
granddaughter
around.
had
They'll be
one.
tugging on it. They'll catch it on something.
I saw you had one, I think it
So-
was kindergarten.
Yeah, I think.
Kindergartners have one.
They just don't make it, at least for my daughter, they don't take them home, but when she gets to school, like
They
they
put
put
'em
on
on,
their
yeah.
ID badges and they wear them around.
In
And then
kindergarten?
at the end of the day, well, I have one in kinder, second and fourth.
Okay.
And then I have a 7th grader at the McFarland, and he is neurotic about keeping his because he can get through the lunch line faster. If you don't have it, then you have to go to the I don't have one and wait for everyone that has one go through first. And so I don't know what my high schoolers do.
It was nothing a big deal. I was just
No,
curious.
it's been left as a
Yeah.
individual building
Okay.
decision.
Again, I would say there's a lot of pieces for us to consider about
Yeah, no.
safety. And again, we're going to be relying on this man here, Greg, to bring back to the executive team, and then for us to share, this is the complete package, we'll bring it back to the board.
I don't know if Pete was gonna say something.
I was just going to share 2 historical comments about the IDs that I recall. One at the high school when that change went away, and it might seem like it's not a big deal, but what I heard today, when you talk about forcing folks to go through a certain sidewalk or not to cross grass because you know they're not supposed to be there, that's what the IDs brought to the site, and things like hoodies. If you saw somebody with a hoodie, you know, that's not what we do here, I'm going to go talk to that guy. If you saw someone without an ID, you knew to stop them in the hall and say, you don't belong here because we wear IDs. I think for some folks it is a big deal, but there were some staff who said, I'm tired of policing this. There are other things I want to focus on, but that's where the conversation was. At the elementary level, they use them to get through the lunch line. It is a convenience, but the reason they don't use them out on the field is just like Greg said, we don't want someone to get hung up and to be, endanger themselves because they had an ID on. But that's the history around them in the last 10 years.
All right, well, I appreciate the information, Chris. I know there's a proposed cost table in your presentation, and based on some of the information recommendations made tonight, I think the next time we visit this, some of these items won't even be a consideration, I don't think. It was plenty of information, good information. I think this combined with some of the recommendations made, I think is going to give us a clear path going forward and once, of course, we hear the all-important financial piece, prioritize some of these things. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it, it's having meetings for the sake of having meetings and workshops. should be a thing of the past. I mean, we need to start acting on some of these things because our kids are exposed to this. So if there's a threat out there, I think it is our job to try to mitigate that as soon as we can. Of course, being conscientious of our limitations. I mean, there's some things that if we could write a check tomorrow, it'd be a no-brainer, and they'd get started tomorrow. Appreciate you guys again tonight, taking time out of your busy schedules. I think this was a very productive workshop. To all the presenters, those that are not here or were here still listening, thank you very much. Unless there's any other questions, I think our business tonight is concluded, and I'll adjourn this safety workshop. Thank you very much.